Hello and welcome to the last chapter, which is chapter 11. And what you see, chapter 11 consists of the existing examples that you can explore and check them out however you wanted to see each node structure that defines the shape as well as the distribution across the landscape and however you want it to work with, depending on how you want to use the PCG for. So as you may see, those are all examples laid down for you. So every time you want to go and check them out, you're free to go and just by clicking one of those examples and checking out their in this case all the examples that are provided in the project, and you can find all of them inside the repository that comes with that on the GitHub. You can open up and check this out if you want to have a look to see how you can use this very simple defined node structure of PCG inside to get those results you wanted. So basically this is just an example that are laid out for you to test out, and feel free to use those examples and you can take them into your projects and test them out and see how it works for you. So have fun with them. The main purpose of doing this tutorial, especially for the chapter 11, is that I also mentioned a very cool feature that came with 5.4. And what this does is, as you can see, you can have a PCG and you can build another PCG on top of it. Basically, you can have different, for example, laid out all the types of meshes that can spawn on across the landscape. What if you want to have static meshes that are already spawned on the landscape, and on top of this spawn another meshes, and you can do it endlessly. But in this case, we are using only one formula to spawn on existing static meshes that are already generated, and this will also repopulate again by distributing another static meshes on top of the static meshes that are already generated. So this is something I want to show you how to do this step by step. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna take some time and I'll show you on how to achieve this effect, and I'll show you what you need to do to get there. So let's open the new project and let's get started. First things first, let's build a landscape on our new project here. I'm gonna create it just like that. I'm gonna set it back to selection. So to begin with, we need to activate a few plugins. So to do it, we need to go and activate first main framework plugin, and the next one, to make sure it works with the effect that we want to use, we have to also enable geometry script interrupt. So this is like for making sure that we can use some of the nodes that comes with the geometry script. Hence, we have to use this one. So we need to make sure you enable first Procedural Content Generation framework, and then we need to also activate Procedural Content Generation framework with geometry script interrupt. Let's create a folder. So I'm gonna just go right click and create the geometry script PCG. All right. So and then open this up, and I'm gonna create two graphs. One's gonna be called PCG mesh sampler. And I'm going to use another one. Let's just duplicate that one and let's rename this to mesh spawner. So you go mesh sampler generator and mesh spawner. And what we need also use is the data structure, because we're gonna actually use some of the models that comes with the project. So under blueprints, you find it. It's going to be structure. Let's call it s_meshes. And for now, let's open this up and let's add some variables here. So this is already existing variables. We can rename that to meshes. And this guy just call it mesh, and make sure you set static mesh, which is this one there. And let's also add another variable, which will be our float. And this one will be very important because this is where we dictate on how much of these static meshes will be spawning on existing static meshes. And so with this one, we can just save that and then go back to our, in this case, graph. And to start off, we're gonna use a mesh spawner. So let's go to our mesh spawner and let's start adding some nodes and configure our setup here. So to begin with, we are going to use the pin, which is already in there. But what we need to make sure is that the pin is not gonna be going as normal pin, but we have to make sure our usage is going to be set into loop, which in other words, every time that any spawn static meshes are being generated, are going to be looping again and again and again in order to fill up every gap that is being spawned on the top of the surface of the new mesh in this case. So keep that in mind. Another thing we need to do is to set this to points, because we need using points for that. So if you open this up, now you see there's a kind of for loop input here, and that's very ideal for this exercise. And another thing what we need to do is to let's add 4 nodes here, and then we're gonna call it from point index. Let's transform points mesh sampler, and last but not least is the copy points. All right, cool. So to begin with, we're gonna use this get attribute from point index to, in this case, allocate what exactly we're dealing with in terms of input. So in other words, that structured data we just created here, which is this one, will be fitting in and using this to identify what attributes we're using for each point index. So in this case, because input source has to be mesh, just like we call it in the data structure here, let's call it mesh. And let's just go ahead and go with the mesh sampler. Let's open this up. And what you see, mesh sampler already has this existing input node here, which basically means we can use static mesh. So we can then very easily point it in and connect with our attribute. So that it identifies the naming between this node and that one. And then transfer points, what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna randomize, at least for the newly spawned meshes, I'm gonna set just to 90, and let me just also for sake of it change the random scale for minimum as well as maximum, so 0.5, 0.8. And also for this one, what we need to make sure is that it comes out, but it has to be at the same LL type, which has to be a point. So that should be okay now. With all this set up, what we need to make sure is that we connect all of them together, just so we have it ready. What I'm gonna first do is to connect our get attributes, so it feeds in, and then we are going to connect these transfer points. And what we're gonna do is to make sure that our source, as it gets through this entire structure of nodes, it feeds into other things like transfer mesh sampler that is going to pick up the mesh and then gets in transfer points, so it changes transformation into the source. And then our target here will be, again, from the input, because it's also our target. And then we're gonna connect it directly to output, because this is what's gonna happen, is we're gonna continue it with the next graph. So at least for now, it's working. So this is pretty much what we need to deal with in that particular section of this PCG graph. Another thing we need to do now is to go to our, in this case, what we have done, another PCG graph. So if I open the mesh sampler generator, I am going to expand a little bit more. So I'm going to move this out of the way, and let me start introducing the nodes we need. First is get landscape data. We're going to serve a sampler because we are going to use this to spawn on our landscape data. And at the same time, let's also match our mesh attributes that we have created previously. So in this case, we're going to call match and set attributes. This is the one that's very important in order to generate these meshes on top of other spawn meshes. Another thing I need to is to also attribute, in this case, partitions. That's our metadata, and I'm also going to add it. And also we're going to spawn the static meshes. Okay, that's pretty much it. So let's start digging into our PCG nodes here. So first things first, let's set this to something that because at the moment it will be way too close to each other. And for the reason, I'm going to set them apart a little bit. So I'm going to set this to 100, 200 by X and Y values here. And also what I'm going to do, go to my match set attribute, match the weight attribute that we have created, which in this case is the float variable from our data structure here. So I'm gonna click on this and match weight attribute and call weight. So it matches the same naming as the one from the structure. With the attribute partition, I'm gonna set this to mesh. And because for this, we are going to use actually static meshes, which are the ones that we're gonna deal with in terms of spawning the meshes. We wanna pick up in this case, a particular mesh that we wanna spawn. And in this case, I need to make sure I set it to soft object path. And I'm going to pick up a chair because just for this exercise, I have the SM_chair, and this comes from starter content, and you can actually add the starter content from add feature content pack if you don't have it, just for your information. So coming back to our graph here, let's go carry on. And the next thing is to make sure I have everything enabled on this side here. So at least I know that my output target has to also be mesh. So don't forget that one. And next thing is to make sure that we are fitting within the right attributes. In this case, we don't want to just deal with selected wave. We also want to make sure it picks up our elements based on the attributes that we have provided. So in this case, I'm going to set to attribute and of course call it mesh. Pretty much it. So I'm going to save it. And next thing is to then add there are two ways to add this. So, and because what we're trying to do is to add existing mesh spawner into our graph. So there are two ways to do it. So from your content browser here, you can just drag and drop into this space here, or and just do this. Or what you can also do is to right click and add a loop subgraph, and just basically goes directly to the loop setting. So in this case, I have my mesh spawner. I can drag and drop into this spot here. And I have the loop activated for this one. So now let's start connecting one another, just so that we fit into proper alignment and order. So I'm going to start with the get landscape data, and I'm going to fit this to connect it to a surface sampler surface, connect it with this, and connect it with attribute partition, goes for looping, and then we can end it to get this mesh spawner here. But of course, what we need also do, because at the moment there's a graph, but it's still not gonna spawn the stuff that we required from the, in this case, data structure we have created here. So we need to make sure it correlates with this data structure. So in order to do this, we need to go to graph settings, and we need to add the parameter. So in this case, I'm gonna do is to go and select this, create a new instance under graph settings, and I'm going to change this to our what we have called S meshes, our data structure that we have created. So now what you see is that we have our data structure enabled through this parameter. Make sure you also name it something like a mesh. So it has to exactly match the same name, just to let you know. And also what we're looking for is we're gonna use this mesh that comes with the project. So in this case, I have imported this SM_mesh, and I'm gonna make sure I set this to 1. And what we're gonna do now, we're actually going to make sure it matches the data. So in this case, I can then use this property I've created, and I'm gonna use get mesh, and I'm gonna connect to mesh data. But because at the moment it only shuffles through the entire node structure here, and it does one way, but we also have to make sure that this matching and set attributes data also feeds directly to your static mesh here. So what we need to do is to make sure we move this out of the way and we connect it directly to this one. So it directly accesses our static mesh spawner node here. So that's pretty much the reason why we need to use that tool. So because at the moment it's literally spawns every point that we get it, but we also want to make sure that by adding this attribute, it's also directly works with our structure that we have created, so that we get this information from the structure, in this case table here, and it feeds directly to the static mesh spawner here. So that's pretty much the reason why we want to use that for. And with this one selected, we can then go back and use our mesh generator which we just created and drag and drop into our space. So let me just move it here. And then if you drag it up here, now you start seeing chairs start to pop onto other static meshes that spawned first. So that's really cool. Now you see that each, in this case, mesh has its own space to fill in into other meshes. And that's very cool exercise. That's something you can go into if you want to create like a moss or any other foliage on top of the existing foliage or rocks, for example. And that gives you a little bit clarity that other options out there available for you to test out. And this entire blueprint structure is entirely for you to go and test this out if you want to see other ways to generate very cool stuff. And this is something for you to play with and experiment more. For now, I'd like to say that I had a great time going through this together with all the chapters that I've created for you. And I hope this whole outline of these chapters will be enough to help you out with projects that you're currently working on. Thank you so much and good luck with all the projects.